Well, we all come across situations like this in our daily life at home and at work. And it's clear that we deal with hygiene in our own way, whether it's simple personal hygiene like washing our hands after a visit to the toilet, or thinking about the dishcloth that we use every day. But it is a fact that good hygiene practices can reduce the risk of infection and illness. Well, joining me today to talk more about this is Professor John Oxford. Now, John is the chairman of the Hygiene Council, and he's here to talk about some research that shows in the UK we're possibly not as diligent as we could be about hygiene. Now, John, do the general public understand what we mean by bacteria?
Well, I think there's a definite lack of understanding in general about bacteria and viruses, full stop, how they are transmitted, how do you get infected, and what you can do about it.
So, John, talk me through it then. How are infections spread?
Well, if we're talking about the home, that's an important place. Most people think you can't get infected in the home, but you can. The most important ways you get infected in the house is probably by the hands, mainly because people cough on their hands and then the virus moves from their throat to their hands and then they touch surfaces. So the most important way is on the hands. The second most important area are the surfaces in the home, those two ways. Of course, the third way is much more difficult to deal with, that is getting close to someone and breathing in their breath. But the good news is, in a way, you can break the chain of transmission by destroying those bacteria and viruses on your hands or on the surfaces, and you can destroy them with modern chemistry in the form of disinfectants. They are very effective methods of destroying bacteria and viruses on the hands and on the surfaces in the kitchen, in the home.
Now, I know you've got some figures about people who wash their hands or don't wash their hands after going to the toilet. Talk me through this. Yeah,
well, it's pretty terrifying for someone like me to get figures in front of me which show me that 40% of young people, that's 16 to 24-year-olds in the United Kingdom, do not wash their hands after coming from the toilet. I found that quite terrifying. It also acts as like a litmus paper from my point of view. It's not just that they're not washing their hands, it tells me that they're not doing other things as well. So it's not good news.
Why do you think it's so high?
It's difficult to know in a modern society in young people why they're not washing their hands, after they go to the toilet. To have 40% of 16 to 24-year-olds not washing their hands is pretty horrific. So I guess in a way they haven't got it as a habit. And we know that people who do things habitually just do it without thinking. So these 16 to 24-year-olds have just not got into the habit of washing their hands. That's a pity.
Well, earlier you mentioned about people passing infections through coughing or sneezing. Tell me more about that. How can we stop it?
When you cough, when I cough, you cough, when people cough and when they've got on the tube or anywhere else, the correct way of doing it, the cough etiquette, is to cough into your elbow. Because no one, when you greet them, do they touch your elbow. They shake your hand. So the idea is not to cough into your hands, but to get into your elbow. If you do cough into your hands, then it's a danger spot because, of course, you will shake hands with someone during the day and you'll transfer the virus. So the only way of breaking the chain of transmission, if you do cough into your hands, is to use a disinfectant wipe.
So we should all be coughing into our elbows instead?
Yes, I think the whole society, there's so many of us now, 7 billion people, we're going to have to retrain ourselves, otherwise we'll be inundated and overwhelmed with these infections, no doubt about it.
Well, let's move now from personal hygiene into, maybe inside the home, things that we can do. What about the kitchen? What sort of issues should we be thinking about in there?
Yeah, the kitchen's a source of infection. We all think the kitchen's an innocent place where you're not going to get infected, but you can get infected in the kitchen. So it's very important to get the hygiene level up there. And we know from this study and from other studies we've done over the years that the dishcloth is an important conveyor belt of infection in the kitchen. The little towel or cloth gets infected, and then people just use it all around the kitchen. It's more or less like a superhighway. So the infection gets transferred. And in this study, we found that 34% of people do not disinfect the cloth between different surfaces. So in other words, if the cloth is contaminated, they just spread the infection around the kitchen. That's not a good situation either.
I know this may seem like a really naive question, but you talk about disinfecting a dishcloth, but in practice, how do you actually do that?
The best way, I mean, I do things in the kitchen, and the best way is to put the cloth in the dishwasher, if you've got a dishwasher, because there the temperatures get quite high, much higher than you could handle normally, and there's some powerful chemicals there. So very few things come out of a dishwasher contaminated. So it's not a bad way of doing it. Or you can just spray some disinfectant on, and then squeeze it out and wash it, and off you go. You need to do something. It's not just a question of just washing it out with detergent, or certainly not washing it out with water. You need to get a bit of chemistry in action.
Well, John, that's within the home, within the kitchen. Coming into the festive season now, people are going out and about all the time, big parties all the time, people getting to know each other. What can we do then to stop the spread of infection?
Well, I don't want to be a sport, but I think the thing to do is not get too close to someone that has got symptoms. I mean, you know, the symptoms stick out, don't they? If you see someone with a common cold, they're rubbing their nose and they've got a cough and they're sneezing around, the thing is to keep away from them. But of course at Christmas, you know, the tendency is to move close in, parties and so on. And one good thing that came from this survey in that context was that 48% of people that we interviewed said they would not get close to someone, they would not kiss anyone showing symptoms of common cold. And I thought that was rather good. So that's a very positive thing that came out of this survey.
Well, that's if you're at a party. What about if you're hosting your own party? You don't want the whole office coming round and getting ill and it being your fault. What sort of responsibilities have you got?
Well, I think you're dead right. I mean, there's a double responsibility, isn't there, with all this? And maybe that's not appreciated in the big wide world, that you don't want to get infected yourself. That's responsibility number one, to avoid getting infected yourself. And then the second responsibility is to stop it moving from you to someone else. And so when you host a party, both those things have to be borne in mind. And so you really have to lift your own hygiene. Otherwise, you're going to infect everyone else with the infection that you've got already. And by lifting your hygiene, basically that means is in the area where you're hosting the party, you do a spray down beforehand to get the surfaces all nice and pristine, and you do a spray down of your hands as well with disinfectant to make sure that any bacteria or viruses on your hands are not there when you prepare the food. I mean, the Dettol range is one example of a spray, cleaning your hands, cleaning the surfaces. There are things you can do. There's modern, powerful chemistry and disinfectants which can kill these bacteria and viruses, and really we need to use them.
So it's not just taking responsibility for yourself, but you've got to look after everybody else as well.
Yes, it's totally, this world of infection is totally about responsibility, and this double responsibility. Do not get yourself infected, and if by chance, in spite of all your efforts, you do get infected, then make sure that you don't infect other people. It's a double responsibility, and I think if we all could take on that, then these great chains of infection could be severed and broken, and that will benefit all of us.
That's at party situations. Christmas, the festive season, it's great for getting all the family together. You know, we're all in a family, whether it's a small family or a big family. We love seeing each other. But how do you stop the infections spreading around the ones that you love the most?
Well, it is a special time, agree with you, Christmas, isn't it, for families? And you do not want a family infection. It's just the last time you want something like that in the family, breaking up a party. But the good news is you can do something about it to protect the family. And I think it has to start with the children, quite frankly, because we know that children of anyone in the family, they're the least hygienic. They are. And they're the ones who have no social distancing. In other words, they get close into each other, very close in. You know, they're not like adults, they're not sitting like 3 feet. So they are the source of infection normally. So you really have to deal with them and concentrate on them first of all. And the way to do it is to make sure that their hygiene practices are better than they would normally be without your attention. They have to start washing their hands after they've been to the toilet, and they can wash their hands several times a day. I mean, it would not be unsuitable to persuade them to wash their hands maybe 6, 7, 8 times a day, and would remove bacteria and viruses from their hands, because they'll be coughing and getting themselves contaminated. So that's the source of it. And then you go from the children gradually upwards in the family and make sure the hygiene level is increasing during this very critical period.
So we've really got to start with the little ones, get them sorted out first.
Start with the young ones, because they're the most likely to be infected with anything, because they've picked up things in their creches and their little schools and all that. Start with them first. Then when you've got them sorted, get the slightly older siblings sorted, and then you're into the adults. Maybe the adults will be more incalcitrant than the children, but they all have to be dealt with.
Professor Oxford, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
So as you can see, it's time we all thought a bit more about how basic hygiene matters in our daily life. If you want more information or more about the topics we've been discussing, you can log on hygienecouncil.com or follow them on Twitter @HygieneCouncil.